Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Kinsevich, licensed professional counselor and assistant professor of counseling at Evangel University. In this video, where we're continuing our module on techniques in supervision, we are going to talk about a strategy called interpersonal process recall. And this is one of my favorite things to do as a supervisor. If you've heard of it, then obviously this is probably going to be a little bit of a review, but if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to not only watch this video, but look up more information about it. I will try to also upload a PDF, but I'm not sure if I'm able to do that with the video link. So if I can, but there's some really great information out there about this technique. So first, basically the whole idea, and this was developed by Norman Kagan, so there's a lot that he has published and a lot of other textbooks and books that have written about it as well. But the first thing is that you would have the supervisee record or script a portion of a session. Ideally, a video recording can give you kind of the fullest amount of information, but we'll talk about some of the complications with that in a minute. The second piece of this is that we use here and now techniques to process the moment. So we're focused on what was going on for the supervisee internally in that moment. And so we'll go into detail about that. And then we'll also talk about kind of the real goals of interpersonal process recall, which is really to allow for exploration of feeling and recall of clinical decision making, more so than on teaching specific clinical skills. So the goal is to promote insight development, and so we'll go into detail on that. So first, we need a recording or a script of some kind. And so we would have the supervisee obtain permission to record. You would want to make sure that your agency has a standard consent form for audio or video recording that can be kept in the client's file. Here at Evangel, we also have our own document, which the clients can sign, and we have to verify that they've signed that. We want to also make sure that we know what device the supervisee would use to record and where that's going to be stored. Nowadays, it's very easy to say, oh, yeah, I'll just record on my phone, and it automatically gets uploaded to a cloud service and all these various things. So honestly, an old school kind of camcorder that has, that doesn't connect to the internet is actually one of the most secure ways of doing it, as well as if you're going to do an audio recording, then kind of an old school, audio recorder that, again, is not cloud-based. As soon as you start getting a phone involved, the security is much harder to control. If recording is not possible, which is true in some agencies or school settings, then you can have the supervisee write out a word-for-word script as best they can in a 10-minute portion of the session immediately after it happens. So they would know, ahead of time that they're planning on this. They would really be attentive during the session, and then they would choose a 10-minute segment and really just as soon as that session is over, just start typing and create a word-for-word script that kind of almost reads like a screenplay. And they would hopefully be as accurate and objective as possible. And so once you have that recording or script, ideally you would view it or read it prior to your supervision meeting with the supervisee. If you don't have time to watch, a 45-minute session, then you can ask the supervisee to isolate a 10-minute portion that they want you to view ahead of time, so they can let you know kind of the start and end time on that. Ideally, this is a moment in a session that evoked some type of feeling for them. It could be a countertransference moment. It could be a moment of feeling stuck. It could be a moment of, I picked this clinical direction, but I could have also picked this other one. So kind of a moment that they want to pause and reflect on. And so in your supervision session, to actually do interpersonal process recall, you would watch or listen to the recording or the script together again. So you've already seen it once. Now you're going through it with them again, and you would let the supervisee know that they can pause the recording at any time, and you also can do that. If you're reading a script together, you might even consider doing it twice. Once where they're reading, they're kind of reading their own part and you're the client, and then swap and they're reading the client part and you're in their place. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. But you're looking for moments where you can pause. And so you would be paying attention to moments where there's a shift in their body language or something that's awkward. That, could be something the client said or did. It could be something you notice about the supervisee's body language. Look for expressions of feeling on the part of the client or on the part of the supervisee. So the goal is to have maybe 1 to 3 of these pause moments to explore the question, what was going on inside you right there? And I'm going to show you some other examples of questions on the next slide. But we're focusing on the here and now. So instead of focusing on skills, we're focusing on the internal process of the supervisee and the interpersonal process between the supervisee and the client. So what is this client evoking? And so we want to pay attention to supervisee reactions and clinical decision points. Remember, the point here is to generate insight. So here are some more examples of IPR questions, and you can find additional examples in this book by Bernard and Goodyear called Fundamentals of Clinical Supervision. It is a textbook put out by Pearson. And on page 230 of that 4th edition, they have a whole page with a whole bunch of lists of questions. I've adapted these from that, but there are so many more. So things like, what feelings came up for you in that moment, in this pause, this moment where we hit pause in this session? What was going through your mind right there? If you could go back and go a different direction, where would you take the client? What physical reactions did your body have in this moment? What might your client have picked up from you right here? Maybe there's something the client is sensing from them. And where do you think your reactions are coming from? So again, getting at underneath maybe some countertransference if that's going on. And so again, we're developing insight through this process. We can lean into our clinical skills here. So we're not in the role of therapist with our supervisee, and that's important to maintain that. But we do possess clinical skills that can help us to use this technique effectively. And so we can attend to the student, we can focus on the emotion, their internal dialogue, we can allow space for the supervisee to process what they might have noticed in the session. We can also use reflection of feelings. So as we hear them internally processing what was going on for them in that moment, we can use reflection of feeling to promote further exploration and insight. Again, avoiding taking it in a teaching moment and more digging deeper into what was going on, where is that coming from, that kind of thing. And so we can encourage exploration of physical sensations. And, again, if we see that body language shift, we can give feedback on that. And then we can allow for a longer process here. So we might spend an entire supervision hour just on one interaction that occurred in the session, just one moment of the session. And so IPR is not a goal-driven or quick supervision strategy. Because we're working on insight development, then that may take a whole session or even multiple sessions. Again, back to the first video in this module, that's why we want to avoid a case management approach to supervision. Because if the only thing we're thinking about supervision is, okay, tell me about this client, tell me about that client, catch me up on, give me an update on all the clients, then we really aren't allowing time for something like this to happen. And so again, what gets lost in there is supervisee development. And the goal of supervision is, yes, client welfare, but also to develop good counselors. And so they need this process to go through the developmental tasks that they have professionally to become a good clinician. So some final thoughts on interpersonal process recall. We can use this in moments of supervisee self-report. So ideally we have this recording, we've looked at it, we kind of know the pause moments we might have, but there may be times where the supervisee is saying, telling you something about a session, telling you about a moment that was, pivotal or, evoked some emotion. And so you can just pause and say, okay, let's just sit in that. Maybe even have them close their eyes, envision being back in the session in that moment, and then lean into these questions and these skills that we just went over. It's also important to follow up on insights. So after you've had a session where you've used interpersonal process recall, make sure you follow up on that in the next supervision meeting. How did they feel, when they met with that client again? Did the interpersonal process recall shift anything with them and that client and how they felt about sitting across from that person. It's important to keep that insight going and not just kind of leave it hanging or dropped. And then just in terms of documenting this, and we're going to talk about documentation in a later module, so to be continued in module 4. But when you write your supervision note, it is important that you document that you use the IPR technique just because it's an intervention. So like you would with a clinical note, you want to kind of capture the process of supervision, capture what interventions you're using, and insights that the supervisee is gaining. That helps us keep a record of the student's development over time. Thanks so much for watching, and the next video in this module, we're going to talk about some experiential techniques. So some other great ideas for you to use in supervision. So go on over to video number 3.